Good afternoon, committee. We'll call the meeting to order. Yesterday, after we adjourned, we found out that a bill had been introduced into the Senate that we can't hold a formal hearing on, but we can have just an informational hearing on. And I wanted to have you give you the opportunity to hear about it and be up to speed on it. And so we're going to have an informational briefing on automated license plate readers. And I would like to introduce to the committee Lieutenant Casey Slaughter, Wichita Police Department. Welcome to the committee.
Break it. There we go. All right.
Yep.
So I provided some testimony just this morning. Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Lieutenant Casey Slaughter, and I'm with the Wichita Police Department. And I provided some testimony this morning on the proposed Senate Bill SB 305. I want to kind of give you just a little bit of background on our program. Actually, here, let's just do this. We started our license plate reader program in 2014 in Wichita, Kansas, following suit from other agencies in Kansas to include Park City, which is kind of our neighbor, who have had license plate readers for a much longer period than we have. Our program started with 2 plate readers, and these were mobile plate readers. And the difference between mobile and fixed is simply kind of what it says. Mobile plate readers have license plate readers affixed to the top of police cars, and they just drive around the city looking for alerts on other cars, whether that be a homicide suspect or a shooting suspect or a victim of human trafficking or kidnapping, things of that nature. So when we drive past a car or near a car and it reads that tag, it'll take a photo of the back of the car and the tag as well. And then it cross-references that to a known list of alerts from NCIC. So a fixed system is exactly kind of, again, what it says is it's actually affixed to a traffic light or a traffic pole, and typically they're stationary. We have one fixed system currently operating in Wichita. We have another one that has been already purchased on federal JAG grant funds, which has not been used. And the reason for that simply is that we were going through the permitting process, which is pretty lengthy. Through Kansas Department of Transportation, we received the permitting for the first license plate reader, which is out in West Wichita. We did not receive a permit for the second license plate reader. And the reason for that was, or at least that I was given, was that there are no laws restricting the availability of captured license plate data in Kansas, which is true. And there are some concerns there that captured license plate data could be subject to a core request. And some of that information could get out and potentially in the wrong hands. Also, then the question was who is responsible for maintaining license plate readers? And that's kind of an easy answer. It's us and or any agency who purchases said license plate readers, whether they're all being allowed to be permitted to put on state-run highways, or if they're going to be put in a city, we still have the responsibility to manage those, and there is no cost that's passed on to the state of Kansas. During this program, we've grown our system to, we now have 7 mobile units, most of which are purchased on, again, federal grant funds. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the one fixed system. We recognize a couple of different, actually 3 different major philosophies related to license plate readers. And I've drafted the policy. They actually appointed me the license plate reader administrator back in 2014 when we started our program. So I wrote our policy. And we looked at several different policies, including the IACP, International Association of Chiefs of Police policies, to help draft ours, and then other policies within the state of Kansas. And so we look at training policy, and audits. So ensuring that training is something that we're enforcing within our agency, and every single officer has to have training, otherwise they don't get access to this system. Every single officer has to have training to drive said license plate reader car, or they don't get to operate the vehicle. This is covered as far as training in the bill that I helped to draft, which is again the SB 305 under Section 1, C2 and C5. Policy, we have a very robust policy. The license plate reader director in Houston HIDA, which stands for High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, that's where we store all of our data. Our data is stored for free through Houston HIDA. So they manage all of the data through basically a network that other agencies around the region can all sign up and share in that information. The director has said that we are one of the role models for how to run a license plate reader program in the country, actually. So we're pretty proud of that. Audits. So I think I mentioned that earlier. Section 1C4 of the SB 305 bill that I helped to write talks about random and directed audits. So I go in, I look at various different ways people are searching for information. Those audits or those audit trails are kept indefinitely. So I think that's a very important part of the legislation to ensure that folks aren't doing things for a non-legitimate law enforcement purpose. In drafting the bill, I looked at 16 different states and their license plate legislation, and I believe I adopted language from about 5 different states when I looked through this. I also provided the opportunity for 5 chiefs of police and the sheriff of Sedgwick County to provide input into the actual legislation. Once that was cleared with all those individuals, I then put forth what I thought was a pretty good bill so far. So what brought us here? Again, I mentioned that we were not permitted for the second license plate reader location for some of those reasons. And frankly, you know, the Cora information being able to get out based on captured license plate data and falling into the wrong hands. And I say that because if someone wanted to say, look up where their ex-husband, ex-girlfriend, ex-wife, whatever has been, and they sent a Cora request up, I'm not sure that we couldn't stop it at this point. So there needs to be 2 things: protection of the public, and 2, accountability for us to make sure that we're doing the right thing, not just in our city, but statewide. So I want to do some self-limiting measures on ourselves and restrict what it is we're looking at and how often we can use these in a responsible manner. So I mentioned storage costs because that's something that did come up. There are no costs passed on to the state. We have 2 vendors right now, one of which we've had since 2014, and we have another vendor who we're currently going through a pilot program. And we've had that pilot program going for about 130 to 140 days roughly. That particular program deals with an annual subscription. They host the data, they encrypt the data. We don't manage that data, nor do we manage the data with the other vendor that is held in Houston HIDA. And there is no additional cost. So neither one of those vendors would have any other additional costs passed on. I don't know if everybody does everybody have a copy of the SB? Okay. So what I would, and what about my testimony? Do you have that from this morning? Hopefully somebody's got that. If you do, I wanted to refer to page 2. Yeah, page 2 of the testimony, and it shows a table. And I found this just a couple of days ago, and it actually, as I testified this morning, really surprised me. This is from the National Insurance Crime Bureau, and it shows the top 10 metropolitan, U.S. metropolitan statistical areas by motor vehicle theft rate. So it's looking at how many motor vehicles are stolen per 100,000. And Topeka, Kansas is number 6 on this list, which is, it's pretty shocking. And as I mentioned this morning, it actually doesn't surprise me to some extent, because I've actually been involved in a pursuit personally within the last couple of years with a truck that was stolen out of Topeka, Kansas. So unbeknownst to me, Topeka is apparently a hotbed for auto theft. So not that we're not in Wichita either, because we are. So a couple of things I want to mention. Statistics. So we've seen in just the last 130 to 140 days that we have been piloting this latest technology for license plate readers, which is all stationary. That's the current vendor we're looking at. We've seen a reduction of auto theft in the number of days it takes to recover a car of 4 days. To me, that's pretty awesome. The statistics showed that it was 14 days to typically how long it would typically take to recover a car. We've reduced it to 10 days. So I would have thought it would have been great to reduce it by 12 hours, but 4 days seems like a pretty good reduction. And then as part of the testimony I provided this morning, I kind of walked through some of the stats to make sure everybody was on the same page. 152 stolen vehicles recovered and $1.5 million. And I remember at some point, maybe someone brought up on social media, well, that doesn't seem like a lot because you could divide 1.5 million by $50,000 cars, somebody said. And I said, well, we don't generally recover $50,000 cars because most of the cars we do find and recover are between $2,000 and $10,000. So that number is very high, and it is a lot in a 4.5 month period. 76 stolen license plates, those are completely separate cases and separate stops from those 152 stolen vehicles. So again, that adds to those numbers. 23 unlawful guns seized as part of those same vehicle stops. Large amounts of drugs, one homicide suspect, multiple robbery suspects, a kidnapping victim, and both suspects arrested. And we also have an outlaw motorcycle gang that's moving into Wichita, which has been identified by license plate reader technology. I have a couple stories I wanted to share, which I did this morning. Some of the successes that we've had with our license plate reader program in Wichita, Kansas, if I can find it. There it is. On 12/11/2020, a 20-year-old man was shot to death by an unknown suspect who witnesses described fleeing the area in a light blue Buick Rendezvous. Detectives analyzed police records and came up with a series of possible license plates and vehicles. ALPR, which is automated license plate recognition, was then searched, and a light blue Buick Rendezvous was documented in the area of the homicide within 10 minutes of the crime. Detectives used this information to locate the vehicle and the suspect, who was formally charged with felony murder, robbery, and juvenile in possession of a firearm. On 12/25/20, 911 call was received for an abduction auto theft from 2001 South Oliver, which was on a blue BMW. And somebody basically went into a gas station and left their 1-year-old child in the back of the car. Auto thieves come along in a Scion, dumps one of the auto theft suspects out. He grabs the car, they leave, and I'm sure he probably didn't realize that there was a child in the car, but nonetheless, that's what happened. ALPR was used and actually located the white Scion, which was used in the commission of the crime. They found the child unharmed, and the Scion was later located, and he confessed and gave up his accomplice, which we got him in custody and got those charges. On 1/4/21, officers used ALPR to locate a VW Passat that was taken in a residential robbery of an 82-year-old female. Victim stated 3 suspects forced their way into her home, knocked her to the ground, causing injury. The suspects took her purse, money, cell phone, and other items before leaving in her vehicle. Officers got a timely ALPR alert in Wichita. Vehicle was located and 4 suspects were taken into custody without incident. Suspects were interviewed by detectives. 1 suspect implicated the other 3, and all 3 were booked and later charged for ag robbery, felony theft, and battery. The last one's a little bit longer, but I'll just give you the short version. Just recently, within the last couple of days, we charged a burglary suspect because of 1 license plate reader hit, which blew the case wide open. It was a serial burglar, and he got charged with 30 of 33 cases, 70 of 74 charges, which were 50 felony and 20 misdemeanor charges in Sedgwick County. And that was because of 1 license plate reader alert. So the program has been extremely successful, and that's probably an understatement. Some concerns that I've had in license plate reader programs, particularly in Kansas, is commercial data collection. And that's something I addressed in section 1A2. Commercial data collection, we have private vendors, and maybe we have them here in Topeka, I'm sure we do, that will drive around and say just a nondescript Ford Taurus, and they'll have license plate readers on the back of that, and they're collecting data for tow companies, repo purposes, financial institutions, and who knows what happens with that data? I don't know either, and my personal opinion, it's not okay. So I wanted to address that as far as the commercial data collection, and we certainly can't sell any of this data for any kind of commercial reason. So that is addressed in the law. Core request for data, we kind of talked quite a bit about that earlier. That's addressed in section 1F. And then the physical locations is an amendment I wanted to try to add on to the bill to protect the physical locations of the actual license plate readers, because we certainly don't want to tell all the bad guys where all the cameras are because we've already had one stolen and we've already had one vandalized. If they knew exactly where the LPRs were, they would just drive around to their streets and circumvent the entire process. I'll leave you with some of the pros, and that is that it's a force multiplier. That's plain and simple. I can take an officer and pay him to stand out on the street corner, write down everybody's license plates and take photos, and then we'll put it all in an Excel spreadsheet. But it takes a very long time to do that, and we would pay a lot of money to do that. Whereas I can take one license plate reader and stick it up at that same corner, and it's doing this fast and efficiently and running it against that hot list, and potentially we're solving crimes extremely quickly. And then objective evidence. These license plate readers don't collect any personally identifying information. There's none going back and forth from Wichita, Kansas, I can assure you, because it's against our policy. Plates and vehicle descriptions is all that it does collect, so it doesn't see skin color, it doesn't see race, it doesn't see anything descriptive about a particular person, and there's no live feeds on these, so we can't monitor video. It's not like video surveillance. It takes a still photo of the back of the car, and then once the retention period is over, all of that data is destroyed. So different vendors have different personal retention policies, and different states have different retention policies, and they're all over the board. All the way from, I was just telling somebody recently, New Hampshire has a 3-minute retention policy, and there's other states that have many, many, many months or years worth of policy or worth of retention. So I drafted the bill, like I said, based off of what I saw was best practices in 16 different states and what would be best for Kansas, citizens of Kansas. And that concludes my testimony, and I will definitely stand for questions.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lieutenant, for being here today
Sure.
and for serving. I have a few questions. I'm glad you addressed my concern about my wife doing a Freedom of Information request to find out where I am. The 60 months that you guys keep this on record, that seems long to me. Is there a reason why it's 60 months?
I'll be glad to explain that. So, like I said, I consulted with 5 different chiefs of police. I initially had a shorter period down, and I'll just, in full transparency, we have a 3-year collection policy or retention policy, I should say, from Houston HIDA, because that's all they will allow with Houston HIDA. So we cannot go beyond 3 years. In consultation with another chief of police who has a larger actually plate reader program than we have, they indicated they could provide testimony as to why it would be important to have a 60-month retention law in place, and thus that part of the bill was born.
So, but I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may continue. So it sounds like even though the bill would give you guys 60 months, you guys would still be 3 years through your.
Wichita, Kansas would have to be, because we can't go beyond that 3-year limit with Houston HIDA.
Okay, and just kind of walk me through this real quick. You guys scan my license plate.
Yes, sir.
It doesn't come back with a hit. Is my information still kept?
Your information would be kept. However, there's a big caveat to that, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier. It has to be searched for a legitimate law enforcement purpose as prescribed in our policy and hopefully as prescribed in law. What that means is each of the 2 vendors that we have, and we're lucky to have 2 vendors because most people would just have one, but they both have a reason for action box. And in that box, by our policy, you have to put a case number down, or if you don't have a case number because it's a crime just occurred, you wouldn't necessarily have a case number right away. You would put a location and a type of crime. So a burglary that just occurred at 100 South Main. So that way, 6 months down the road, if we find out something improper did happen, we can come back to you and say, why did you search this tag? And you'll be able to remember. If you didn't type anything in there whatsoever, which that's not allowed, but if you didn't, or you typed in criminal investigation, then you might have some memory issues with why you were searching that tag. So we're gonna ultimately hold you accountable, you meaning the officer, of course, for what you search in this license plate reader system.
So just a hypothetical situation.
Yes, sir.
I am by an interest bank in Wichita, which I represent, and there's a robbery that happens there. And you guys have a scanner that scans all the license plates in that area. You could then go back later on and do a search of all the license plates that were scanned in that area to help further along your investigation of the robber.
That's correct.
Okay.
We would look at the timeline. Let's say it happened within 20 minutes. We can put that 20-minute timeline in there. We can search by partial plates, full plates. The newest vendor we're looking at right now can search by make, color, and type of car only, and then come up with, we can develop that plate if we need to. So if somebody says, hey, I just saw a red Ford Fusion leaving the bank with ski masks on, that's what we would be looking for, is a red Ford Fusion.
Okay, and one just last quick question, Mr. Chair, if I may. The stationary license plate readers, you guys, do you guys randomly move those to different areas, different hotspots, or are those stationary to where they're staying in those spots?
I'm actually really glad you asked that because that's another good key point. So the stationary license plate readers that we're testing or piloting right now are very modular. They're solar powered and they're battery powered. So they're not wired into anything, although they can be wired. So we can move those as crime hotspots go away. So when we look at heat maps and crime data-driven analytics, if you overlaid that right over the top of the city of Wichita, it almost mirrors exactly where we have stationary license plate readers. And when those crime hotspots are gone, we'll move them to another area that is exhibiting serial crime.
Do you guys still have this might have been a few years ago, you guys rolled out those, I guess, sound alarms to where if there were bullets going off, I think you guys put some in Northeast Wichita. Do you guys still have those?
We do have gunshot detectors. I'm not in charge of that program.
Okay. But they're still out there in
They're
Wichita?
still out there. I don't know how well they're working.
Okay, yeah, that was I remember hearing about that a few years ago, but I haven't heard anything since. Thank you so much, Lieutenant. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation.
Yes, sir.
I have a couple questions. When you have the reader and if it's stationary or if you have a mobile unit and it's scanning these tags, it goes, I want to make sure I understand this, it goes into a system and then it's looking for what you said, alerts, NCIC hit or something where stolen car or this tag is associated with a burglary or something like that. That's what you're looking for, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you said you have a 16-month hold on the information that you're gathering?
So with one of the vendors, we have up to a 3-year retention period, so 36 months with that particular vendor.
So am I wrong in saying that it's almost, you're looking for anticipatory crimes that something may happen when you're keeping those for that length of time?
Not in my opinion, at least from what I've seen, we're looking at historical crimes. So say a violent felony, a crime occurs like a robbery or a shooting or a homicide, we can go back after we've already done an investigation for maybe what's gone cold for a year or two. And then if we had developed something later, we can go back and say, wow, that car was right there 5 minutes from the crime or at the crime scene. But again, it's all dependent upon whether or not a license plate reader saw it. So I tell everybody, we've got 7 license plate readers that are mobile, but that's subject to whether or not you actually drove by that location and made visual contact with those license plate reader cameras.
And when you said that, if I may, I want to expand on a little bit. You're using it for legitimate law enforcement use, and then you said that there are private companies or vendors that are using this for repos or some other type of activity. Do they have access to the same system that Wichita PD or any other law enforcement?
So
I mean, are they all accessing through Kansas Department of Revenue, their driver control base as far as tags?
So it's a multi-part answer, if you don't mind. So when we were first demoing and doing some different pilot programs with multiple vendors back in 2013, 14, in that area, we looked at a vendor that also sold that part of that, which was the commercial private data. And those folks who were going around gathering those tags would report back to law enforcement. So we had all of that data being collected. I didn't like that at all, which is part of the reason why I recommended not going with that vendor, because I could see the opportunity right there for lawsuits and improper use and things like that. We cannot report back to anybody on the private sector from any kind of license plate data, reader data, no matter what vendor we have. So, for instance, the current license plate reader vendor that we're testing, they have the ability to allow neighborhood associations and homeowners associations to purchase one for their neighborhood if they want to. I've seen great interest in this, way more than I would have even guessed. And we have a developer in the area who has purchased one, or actually two now, I think, for some of his developments at the request of those neighbors within the development. So they have a one-way in, one-way out type of entrance-exit situation. They own their own data, but they can report to us as law enforcement all that data. They have the ability to not share it if they don't want to, but 9 times out of 10, they're going to share it with us because they want us to show up and catch the auto thief that just entered their neighborhood at 2 in the morning because they're up to no good.
Is one of those areas Eastboro?
No, I don't think there's anything in Eastboro yet, but not saying it couldn't be.
That was a. So, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Representative Ballard.
Representative just asked one of my questions. I think you answered. But so this is only for car theft.
It's okay. So no, that's the short answer. The long answer is what can be tagged onto a vehicle is really any type of crime. So burglary suspects, robbery suspects, homicide suspects, you can type that in, tag that vehicle if you know that vehicle has been involved based on witness accounts, video accounts, whatever it is. And as that vehicle traverses the city, it gets alerted on by multiple, in some cases, multiple license plate readers, and that allows us to respond quickly and hopefully get that car stopped.
Okay. I think you addressed it a little bit. Okay. So I work with women that have been sexually assaulted, domestic violence, stalking. And if you're talking about taking them to a shelter and everything else, that's why the shelter's address is never known. They're not supposed to do anything to draw attention to that. What keeps this reader or whatever you have for getting multiple information, which you indicated you're not supposed to be using, but someone that's very sophisticated or even on your own force, police force, having that privilege to get that information?
So it really comes back to the 3 key elements of this is the upfront training. We tell them, here's the policy, here's what you can and can't do. We have ongoing training that people can go to as like refresher training if they, say their access is expired. And then back to the policy. They have to read the policy. They have to understand the policy. And I've gone over the policy with every single officer that had come into the department at the time we were doing this. And I'm still doing recruit training as well. So I'm kind of wearing a lot of hats. But and then it comes back to the random and the spot checks and the directive audits. And I say directive meaning if I knew that, say, an officer was up to no good, if I had that heads up and we had some suspicion that an officer was acting inappropriately, I would then go on my own and go look at that officer's audit trail to see what it is they've been searching, who they've been looking up, and why. Are they providing legitimate law enforcement purposes? Are they providing case numbers? And that can, of course, lead into multiple other types of investigations. Even if so, say the officer put in a case number and it had nothing to do with anything, that can also be cross-checked and referenced into were they even on that call? Did dispatch or CAD show them on that call? I'm kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but that can spawn into a larger investigation to ensure compliance with policy and discipline if we have to.
Last question, Mr. Chairman. What are we behind in having access to this kind of information as compared to other states? Where do we fit in? Are we way behind? Is this going to be an innovative thing on behalf of Kansas? Where do we stand in terms of needing to have this in order to really protect our citizens?
And I just want to ask a quick question, follow up. Are we talking about the law or the technology?
Technology.
Okay. I would say that we're probably right on par, maybe with the rest of the country, but a little bit behind on establishing law. So the fact is, license plate readers are out there. They've been out there for a long time. Like I said, Park City, I think, had theirs since 2008 or 9, and then Lenexa, I think, has had their program since 8 or 9, somewhere in there, way before we did. But in all that time, there's been no rules. There's been no regulations on what's going to happen if you do misuse it, which is part of why I put in the law that it's going to be a Class C misdemeanor. So there are legal issues that you're going to face if you start doing things that are for a a legitimate law enforcement purpose. I think we're behind on law, yes. Having reviewed 16 states worth of laws, and yes, they're all over the place, like I mentioned earlier, I think we are behind a little bit.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions. So where is this data stored? You said it was out of state, the vendor that we're using?
Yes, so it's stored, that data is stored in Houston HIDA. It's high intensity drug trafficking area. Federally funded program, has a lot of different services. One of those services is allowing law enforcement agencies who use license plate readers to store their data for free.
Okay. And then what jurisdictions are able to see the data that you collect? Is the county, is KBI, is the FBI able to see that data?
So if that's a two-part answer because we have two vendors.
Yeah.
So if they sign up with Houston HIDA, which requires an MOU, so it's kind of the same answer really, but if they sign up with Houston HIDA, we can elect to share with them, they can elect to share back with us. The other vendor, same type of situation. If they sign the MOU with the vendor will then come back to us, say, do you want to share your information with them? Whether they have a license plate reader program or not, that can happen under an MOU. And I can speak probably specifically for Sedgwick County. They have been sharing with us for probably about a month and a half or so with the current vendor that we're testing. And they've had enormous success. And they don't have this particular vendor of license plate reader. They do have one mobile unit with the other vendor I mentioned.
And then if the FBI wants to access our data, are they bound by any laws that we in the state of Kansas place on how the data can be used?
Well, so interesting you ask. The FBI supervisor has reached out to me and had some questions. I think there was 5 questions that she had because I know that their agents are interested and their task force officers who are us. We serve on task forces with the FBI as well. They're interested in using license plate reader data because it's assisting in their investigations too. The stance on that currently, unless something changes, is that they must sign an MOU through all of their channels, and I'm sure it's tremendous, but all their channels would have to agree to that MOU as well with that particular vendor, and then we would have to decide, are we going to share?
Yeah, one of the hats I wear, besides being a state representative, is I'm a professor in the Homeland Security Program at Criminal Justice Department at Wichita State. I'll tell you, I'm terrified of this technology, and I'll tell you why very quickly. You said it yourself. There's a huge difference between your officer standing on a corner, taking this data manually and putting it in a spreadsheet, and a machine, an all-staring eye that can just collect data all day. What you're doing is you're collecting big data, and the machine learning technology is well advanced to the point where somebody could start to do with those huge volumes of data, looking at crimes that were committed, developing a pattern, and then finding suspects that are likely to conduct a crime. If that sounds familiar, that's exactly what China does in Xinjiang province with facial recognition data and with license plate data. And so I don't mean to in any way imply that that's your motive in supporting this bill. I think that your motives are pure, but federal government will have access to this information, and and it's going to be on file for 60 months, and that terrifies me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Received Elperdang.
Interesting comments there. Couple of questions if I could, but we're, we had, I want to say roughly a week ago, we had the CEO from KTA in here testifying to us, and I asked him a question about NCIC and the cameras up and down the turnpike, which is out of your jurisdiction there. But so the question is, dealing with that, are you tapped in? And I think maybe so, but are you tapped into a national database? Because I asked him specifically about human trafficking and what technology is there to possibly help reduce those numbers, knowing where Wichita stands in the ranking in the country of human trafficking. And I guess I just like some information there as far as if it's just a local database you're using, you don't know if it's somebody coming up from Dallas or Houston, et cetera. But if you're tapped into a nationwide, it may be keying off that this tag is now suddenly roaming the streets of Wichita.
So to answer your question, sir, the second vendor, which is the most recent one that we're piloting, this is local only. There are opportunities for us to share in a larger network, but we aren't currently doing that. The first vendor, the one we had in 2014, who is, again, a data's housed in Houston, Haida, that is a regional sharing information system. So if we had human traffickers, and we have, crossing state lines, or in one case I can remember also, not quite as bad as human trafficking, but we had an individual stole 5 cars from a well-known car lot in Wichita and drive them down to Tulsa and then eventually to Texas. We have the ability on some occasions, if they cross license plate readers, to say, hey, you know, we've located them in Dallas, or we've seen that they're in Houston or wherever has a license plate reader. I couldn't probably testify to exactly where they all are in other states, but I know Kansas Turnpike Authority and several other surrounding states do share with us, and then we share back with them.
Okay.
There is a synergy there.
And then over to stolen vehicles, about how, do you have a number for what was stolen? I'm going to say annually or last year in Wichita Metro.
I don't think I would have the answer to that to speak intelligently. I can get it to you, certainly. And you'd think, as the auto theft commander now, I would have it, but I've only been the commander for 2 days.
Oh.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
That's the reason I was asking you that.
I will get that. Yes.
Okay.
The answer would be a lot. I will say this, auto theft, I just looked at the CompStat report this morning, so I can at least speak to this. Auto theft is on the rise and has been for the last 5 years. So we are still way, way up over a 5-year period when you're looking at month versus 5 year, 6 months versus 5 year, et cetera. However, in the last 3.5 months, we've been significantly down almost every month. And there's only one correlation it could be. It's the fact that we have a vendor out there right now with a lot of stationary LPRs, and we're catching people left and right with auto thefts. The very first day we had those deployed, we caught a carjacking suspect out of Kansas City that had driven down here, stole a car. We approached, and there was some other random guy on a bicycle near that truck, and he happened to be a parole absconder. So just wrong place, wrong time for him. But needless to say, we've caught a lot of folks using license plate reader technology.
Okay. And then, so you've only been in that position for a couple of days.
Just as the auto theft commander. I've been the license plate reader administrator since 2014.
If I could just put a bug in your ear, this was fall of 2019. It was at 13th and Mays. The individual's name was Dow Summers. He's in my district. Had his vehicle stolen from his garage. The guy is mid-80s or so. Called Wichita PD specific auto theft, tried to report it. They wouldn't even take the report. They said, we get so many vehicles stolen here, it's just another one, it's gone. He contacted me. I drove him down to the station, and we went through at least 3 officers who did not want to even take the report. I witnessed it firsthand, so I hope that is changing, if anything, just for the perception of the people out there that we're supposed to be serving.
Well, that's extremely concerning. And I agree, that's not right. You have a couple of mechanisms to report auto thefts now, and that's one through ks.gov, which is you can just do it right over the phone, and it goes right into the system. And once it's in the system, those LPRs are automatically looking for that vehicle. And then 2, again, like he can report it to any officer or at the station. Auto theft, I would tell you, generally is not the best mechanism to report it, simply because those are detectives and they're involved in all the follow-up from all the other reports that are coming in. And I would tell you, just in the couple of days I've been there, it's astounding the number of auto thefts we have a day in Wichita to assign out to detectives. I can tell you it's 2,000 at least a year is what I was told just before from my predecessor who occupied the position. And we have 5 detectives. So 2,000 auto theft cases or more.
May I continue, Chairman? Okay, just more. I'll keep it short. Previous years, I've served over on the Corrections Committee, and we've heard from several. But one of the laws we looked at was in specific to auto theft. In Kansas, if there's a difference between a felony and a misdemeanor on if I'm planning on a permanent deprivation of the vehicle versus a temporary. Have you, with only 2 days, I'm sure, but have you seen that play in where people know that and they can, it's up to us to prove they were going to permanently deprive a person of the vehicle versus letting them off on a misdemeanor and they go out and do it again?
So yes, is the short answer again. In a different day and time, and maybe my younger, maybe not quite as bigger days, I will actually chase people doing this kind of crime. I will tell you, it's getting more and more difficult. It seems like to charge people with a permanent auto theft crime, and a lot of folks are getting away with this criminal deprivation because they're saying, "Well, it wasn't my car. I didn't steal the car. Somebody gave me the car." That's always what seems to be the answer. I have heard recently, and maybe you could clarify that there's some truth to, there may be some legislation coming through that says if you're involved in an evade and elude, a car chase, and you're driving a stolen car, it's an automatic felony. I hope that's the case because I would tell anybody who would want to listen that if you're running from us in a stolen car, you intended to keep that car. There's no intent to, shortly deprive the owner of that vehicle. You're trying to keep it. So if that can help us some way, that would be great.
Very good. And then the last question, totally unrelated to this, but in checking with state troopers and Sedgwick County sheriffs, those officers who wanted to have their COVID shots have had them. Is that true with Wichita PD yet?
Yes, we have had that opportunity. I've got both vaccines or both shots for the vaccine for myself. And we had a very long line of people at our police academy who did get the COVID vaccine.
That just recently happened then?
Just recently.
Okay, because there's been some of us here fighting to make it happen, but it's been very disheartening. But
And we appreciate that.
we're trying for you. So, okay, thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Hilgerson.
This is not related to the previous representative's questions, but they are, because I've had different constituents that have said the same thing, that they report it to police officers, sheriff's officers, and to the district attorney's office, and no one prosecutes for car theft. They have told me that that we need to change the penalty because that's what the problem is. And that I've been told by the Sedgwick County DA's office that there supposedly is a task force working, and there have been meetings with the Attorney General's office. I mentioned to you, because I'll ask you for a card following this, that it's something that's starting to boil up. That and catalytic converters in Wichita, where they steal those in a matter of a minute or 2 minutes with a cut saw and, can sell them for whatever, $200, $300, $400. So it's a little unrelated, but we both have had the same problems in Sedgwick County. Let me go back. You mentioned that you only have one fixed or 1 or 2 fixed cameras, and then you have several others, portable. I'm assuming that the ones that are stationed above intersections are on a totally different system.
They are, sir.
Are they connected at all with the cities? I'm looking at, is it a city system?
Yes, so it's, the city purchased these under federal funds. It's the vendor we've had since 2014. Sorry, I know it gets confusing because we got 2 vendors.
Okay.
But yes, those are city owned.
And yours are city owned.
Yes, sir.
Are they at all intermixed?
Between the 2 vendors?
Not between the 2 vendors, the information.
The information can be shared through the Houston HIDA network regionally and in our small area. So Goddard, Mulvane, Park City, Sedgwick County, us, we can all share because we all border each other and we're part of the Houston HIDA network.
What I'm referring to is your units of getting the license tags. That information can be shared and vice versa with the intersection cameras, which are on a different system.
Okay, so you mean our mobile units? Yes, our mobile units that travel around and that one fixed system that we have out west, those are the same vendor and those talk to each other.
Talking about the systems that are at the intersections in Wichita.
So, okay, there's only, this is where it gets confusing, I apologize. The one vendor that we have, that's on a state-run highway, and that is also tied in with our 7 mobile systems. We have a separate vendor that has modular solar-powered license plate readers. Those can be put at intersections, they can be put on light poles, and they can be put on, really any pole. They can have their own proprietary pole if they want to.
Are the ones that are in the city of Wichita at the intersections currently, are those on a separate system or are they all connected? What I'm looking at, we have moved from just doing license tags to filming the whole intersection. And I'm not saying for or against that. I'm just saying I think that the system, what you're describing is license tags, but I see the city of Wichita going to license tags, intersections, mobile units. Is that the direction we're heading?
It's a complicated answer. So we don't have them on that I can think of very many, if any. I'd have to look at the deployment map again, where all 4 directions of an intersection are covered by a license plate reader. It's not really, we've learned from a learning curve, not really the best deployment of those. You could, however, but it's also very expensive to do that. License plate readers are not cheap. It's not a cheap technology. So it's very cost prohibitive and we have to deploy them pretty sensibly. And what I mentioned, I guess, a little while ago to somebody, in a very ethically designed network within the city of Wichita.
You have, granted, you have designed the system as ethically as you can. But I'm also seeing that without a whole lot of effort, if you're not there, someone could change protocols very slightly and have a system set up. Well, you mentioned Homeland Security. I think of London or some of the other international capitals that basically have camera systems set up, and we have one mass system set up, and police officers or some branch viewing anyone and everyone to see what's going on. You turn on one of the cop shows and they show that. We're not too far from that in my mind. It raises a lot of ethical and legal questions in my mind. What do you think of it?
One of the things to keep in mind on this, sir, is that license plate readers only capture the tag in the back of the car. They're not looking at people. They're not supposed to be looking at people, and generally they don't. I'm going to say 99.9% of the time. On occasion, we'll get a front plate, which Kansas is not a front plate state, and you can barely make out the silhouette of a person, usually in the driver's seat. Going back to the audits, it's important that agencies are forced by law, in my mind, to have a policy. I know the 5 areas that are around Wichita, or maybe I should say it's 4. 4 areas around Wichita have adopted a policy very similar to ours because I believe we have a robust policy that's gone through several reviews over the course of several years. And then it comes back to being able to know through those audits and spot checking and directly checking what are people looking at and why are they looking at it, and making sure that they're not looking at things for a non-legitimate law enforcement purpose, which I did address in the bill, which is also addressed in our policy as well. So those are the key points in mind, for me at least. And I would probably leave you with, I guess, this. We want to really stress that we're trying to hold ourselves accountable as law enforcement so that we restrict this and put some kind of rules on this to address exactly what you're saying. And we want to also protect the data, protect the public from unlawful disclosures of data or data that would be disclosed for a humiliating type purpose, which shouldn't be disclosed.
You know, we passed an innocuous bill this session that said that for emergency purposes, the Department of Revenue would have the nearest relative if someone was in an accident. That is a database that'll be set up by the Department of Revenue that will be available to all police officers. So if I'm a police officer and I see a license tag, I can type in that license tag, and I not only get the information off of who owns the vehicle, but I can also get their next of kin or the related individual. You know, you can see how quickly information becomes available and how it can be tied or linked, and what kind of protocols do we develop to protect that and to protect everyone.
Definitely understood, sir.
Thank you.
We've got several with more questions. I would like to point out that this is something that's going on now. These readers are being used. What we're discussing really today is the possibility of setting something up down the road that would limit what can be done with the data and put into statute to protect the people and hopefully have it work the right way. I would, next question, Representative Seibert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can.
Appreciate this, and I want to say thank you to the officer here today. I think he's actually been grilled more today than the guy that stole my car and was deported 3 times. I know you got a tough job, and I appreciate what you do, and I'm behind you 100%. I think a lot of people have never been broken into, had the sanctity of their house broken into. I represent West Wichita, clear to Cheney Lake, and then to Hutchinson. I live down by Cheney Lake. We've been broken into 3 times in the last 3 years. I had a car stolen, a vehicle stolen, a lawnmower stolen, a trailer stolen at different times. And I don't think people appreciate what you guys have to do. And I do. None of them have ever been charged because there was always a technicality in the law. And you guys did what you did. The guy that broke into one of our buildings on the farm, he stole 3 vehicles that weekend. And before they got the paperwork done, when they caught him, they released him on a $10 bail. I appreciate what you do, and I know it's tough. And hate that until people find out what it's like to have something, the sanctity of your home, to know somebody's been in there while you're gone or while you're there, worried about whether it's ethical or not. And although I did have my daughter arrested for an expired tag, and she had the tag sticker in the glove box from an overzealous city cop in a little town, that was all resolved. Those are the problems that everybody has. But I do appreciate what you do, and I think some of this will work because I live down by Cheney Lake, and 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, you hear cars racing by that are not from our area. And I don't know how you even combat it. But the guys there's 4 people broke into neighbors' houses that night and stole 3 vehicles. And then I can see how frustrating it must be for you, but I would like to help you any way I can to be able to track these people and not worried about some of the things that have been brought up today. But I do appreciate your service for our community. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry if I got a little off there, but until you've had somebody in your house 2 or 3 times while you've been gone, what if he would have been there, or if my wife would have been there, because I was up here 2 times, and that scares me. And thank you, officer. I appreciate your job. Be happy to visit with you too anytime you want, because Mr. Easter and I are pretty good friends. We've talked about the same issue. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I agree that the technology, there's a good use of the technology. I'm concerned about us not having control of the data. I understand that there are MOUs in place, but one federal law, and they can do whatever they want. This organization that right now is storing our data, would it be possible to replicate that in the state of Kansas so that we could maintain sovereignty over the data that we're collecting, and then our laws would determine what we could and couldn't do with that data, and how much, I mean, do you have any idea how much it's cost, and, you know, whoever's storing our data now?
So the answer is to that is I don't know how much it costs. I know it's going to be expensive, certainly, to do that. It can be done. That's the answer. It can absolutely be done in the state of Kansas. We would have to tie into our own server, essentially, throughout Kansas. Yes, sir.
Representative Ballard.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that the reason we were having, this hearing is so we can determine what it is.
This is really just an informational hearing so that you have an opportunity to get a heads up of something that is over in the Senate and they're working on now. We don't have a bill to hear at this point in time, but this gives us a jump start on that. So you all have a little bit of a heads up and be ready if we bring it.
For that, I want to thank you for that and for this testimony, because when you asked me, was it technology or was it also the law? And you gave two specific answers. We are behind on the law. I don't think a state or a city or a county can afford to be behind on the law, because that's going to affect another human being, whether it's a woman, whether it's a child, whether it's whoever. I think we have to make sure we are current with the law. And if we can put the technology that we only keep what we need in order to be able to prosecute properly or to hold them with, you know, whatever we need to do, then we need to sync those two. But I would never let the fact that collecting that information would be the bigger factor. The factor is be specific about what we need, because that's what the FBI, that's what the police, that's what they ask for. Did you go beyond what you were supposed to get? And I think once we do that, then we can catch up and be in keeping with the law, because our job really is to help protect people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this may be a question for you. Is there a possibility that we have a meeting next week to perhaps work the Senate bill? Is that a possibility?
That could be a possibility. I really don't know at this point in time.
Okay, I didn't know if that was, I guess, and I know we're treading carefully here, if that was the route we were going to take, and if we had an opportunity to perhaps craft some amendments. But if there's another route that's happening, that's perfectly fine as well. I was just curious about what the plan was. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Don't really have one at this point in time. But we're trying to get everybody up to speed as much as we can right now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At this time, Deanna Williams with the Department of Revenue is, I believe, on the line. Do you have any questions, or do you have any comments? Must not be on. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Representative
Yes,
Hardison? You have a
Yes, thank you,
question?
Mr. Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank the officer for testifying today. My question goes in line to what my good friend from Leavenworth, Representative Proctor, was talking about in terms of jurisdiction on the data. Are there, but the people who actually are storing this data, you did mention they're in Houston, is that correct?
Yeah, it's Houston and Houston, Texas.
Okay, so are there any, in regards to people, like, is there any security team that actually checks to see if these systems are actually secure from hackers in terms of actually accessing all this information that's being stored down there? Because I'm more in line with if there's any way that we can actually this data that we collect from license plates here in our state to remain here in our state. I'm kind of in line with that, but you know, that's down the road. But my question to you, is there any security team within the police department that actually tries to hack in to see if they can actually pull out information from these systems that you guys are collecting?
We don't have a security team that tries to do that, but I can tell you that Houston HIDA is a professional organization with a very high level of encryption. And this, again, Houston HIDA has been operating for quite some time. as far as encryption, that's something I also included in the bill as part of the requirements of the law, that you'd have to have your captured data encrypted and stored from a point of view of security.
Okay, so another question. There hasn't, to your knowledge, I know you said you've just been on, but to your knowledge, has there been any breach in terms of security failure in regards to the software or database?
There have been absolutely no breaches that I'm aware of, sir.
Okay, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for your attendance and being here.
Sir.
My only concerns is maybe the breach of information on, and what I mean about this is, like with our constitutional liberties with the Fourth Amendment or the Kansas Bill of Rights in Section 15 on the seizure of information and collecting data on individuals and citizens, and just the long term of 60 months again. And believe it or not, I don't always put my faith in government or in the federal government, especially as that. And by making pacts or whatever with the FBI and just seeing the collection, the immense collection of big tech in these days, I think that's a big concern of many citizens. And I think it's a valid concern on just the storage and the data that comes about. It could be today just the simple things as reading a license plate, but then it begins to read individuals' habits and their patterns and so on, and making profiles. So I think that's a big concern of mine. So, but I do appreciate this hearing because you watch TV and sci-fi or read 1984, and here we are. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions? Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to put this into context, if you have a Wichita PD patrol officer who's out driving around, doesn't have the read, just him, and he sees a car, maybe he has a hot sheet, maybe he doesn't, or maybe he's a roll call, and they said red four-door Ford with a partial plate. Well, he sees that parked in front of him, or he's at a stoplight. Runs at NCIC, run 2829, come back with a hit. Stolen, or the person that's in the car fits a description of a robber. So he stops him and does whatever he has to do. That's okay, right? I mean, that goes on pretty much every day. What I was talking about earlier was when, and I think a lot of other people are talking about, is you're storing that for 16 months or longer, and it's what the other representative said, and you know, I'm not going to go into much detail about things, but known drug locations, targets of opportunity that have been hit before, what we used to call stop and robs, and things like that. And I kind of understand that people are going to show up, and you'll see that, as the word somebody said, it was a trend or a pattern, and so that's a good thing. That's good police work. But when you get caught up and you have all these other people that are just showing up there and then leaving, and all that's in that database, and I think what Representative Proctor was talking about is what's happening with all that in the meantime. And I think that's what I think that's what everybody's kind of talking around. So, but it's a good thing when you're in a patrol car and you're driving down there and said, give me a 10-28-29 on this, and you get a hit, then that's good police work. So I can see it both ways. So I just want to make that comment. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, Lieutenant Slaughter, thank you very much. We've kind of put you on the hot seat for quite some time, but you've handled it well. You told me this morning earlier that this was your first time up here. You've acted like a pro, and you are a pro.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members. I appreciate your time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
Representative Seibert,
yes.
could we get his card so we can talk to him individually if we'd like?
I'm sure we can. We can get his contact information.
Okay, great. Thank you. And
I will
thank you, Ken.
definitely
You
write
did a
it
great
down.
job.
Thank you, and I appreciate your support, sir. I will write it down. As I said, I've only been in auto theft like 2 days, so I don't have a card.
We'll get your information, then we'll send it to our committee then. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Committee, that takes care of our business for today. I appreciate your attention and coming on such short notice. We are adjourned.